Lucas McCain was a man of the high desert, his face carved by wind and sun, a solitary figure whose quietude was his most defining feature. He was a homesteader, not a rancher, having claimed a patch of hard scrubbish land at the foot of the Dragoon Peaks 15 years ago. His cabin, built from rough-hewn timber and local stone, was a monument to his tenacity. Lucas lived by a strict, almost stoic code: honest labor, self-reliance, and an absolute intolerance for cruelty. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the undeniable weight of the silence they broke. The woman he hired, Willow Sky, had arrived in the settlement of Red Rock Crossing barely 2 months prior. She was 21, with hair the color of midnight, and eyes that held the distant, haunted look of a startled deer. Lucas needed help maintaining his small plot and fetching water. Willow needed to disappear and earn her keep. He never pressed her for details, respecting the privacy that felt less like a preference and more like a necessity for her. She was diligent, swift, and almost unnervingly quiet, traits Lucas appreciated. A faltering step. This morning, however, broke the established rhythm. Lucas had returned from checking his water cisterns, his canvas duster heavy with the morning chill. Through the kitchen window, he caught a glimpse of Willow. She was crossing the room with a pronounced painful hitch in her gait. Her left leg dragged, and with every few steps, she had to clutch the back of a chair or the edge of the large wooden table. Her breath catching in a visible gasp she tried to swallow. He paused outside the door, the cold iron of the latch burning in his calloused palm. He'd seen her favoring her leg before, subtle movements he'd dismissed as fatigue. But this was different. The unnatural stiffness in her spine, the sheer effort in her simple movements, reminded him of a Mustang he'd once found trapped in barbed wire, trying to move normally while masking a deeper systemic injury. Lucas pushed the door open. The familiar squeal of the hinges cut the silence. Willow spun around, attempting a swift return to composure, but she was too late. Her face was bloodless, and for a fleeting second, he saw a spike of raw terror in her eyes. Not fear of him, but a reflexive, deep-seated dread. She turned back to the wood stove, fussing with the kettle. "Good morning, Mr. McCain. The hot water's ready," she murmured, her voice unnaturally bright, a sound like thin ice cracking under pressure. Lucas hung his duster on the peg. He observed the slight, involuntary flinch in her shoulder as she poured his tea, the tremor in the hand that wasn't even touching the cup. These were the only confessions she offered. Lucas had spent a lifetime reading the desert, the shift in the wind, the tracks of a sidewinder, and he recognized the language of distress when he heard it. The injury was clear. The source was not. Was it an accident of circumstance, or the cruelty of a predator? The answer would define Lucas McCain. He took the steaming mug she offered, their fingers brushing. Her skin was startlingly cold. He felt her recoil, a tiny jerk of withdrawal that wasn't shyness, but an anticipation of harm. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving her face. "Willow," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly note. "You are injured." It was a statement of fact, not an inquiry. The kitchen air grew heavy, only the quiet hiss of the stove for company. The distant, mournful cry of a coyote echoed from the peaks. She turned finally, her eyes dull with the defeated look of someone who had given up the fight for dignity. Lucas's gaze fell to her face. A barely hidden cut had split her lower lip, and a sickly yellow bruise blossomed high on her cheekbone, partially concealed by her loose hair. "I took a tumble," she recited, too quickly, too perfectly. "Clumsy me, slipped on the rocky path coming from the spring." Lucas set the mug down, with a deliberate, echoing thud. "Show me the spring path," he countered. Her composure fractured. "Sir, the path you slipped on. We'll walk it together." Willow's face went chalk white. They both knew the path was a gentle slope, well-worn and free of treacherous rocks. Furthermore, her tiny one-room shack, which Lucas had helped her move into, sat on level ground, no steps to slip on at all. The lie was exposed, hanging limp and obvious between them. She grabbed the edge of the counter, pulling herself upright with a forced rigidity. "I have chores, Mr. McCain." He watched her pivot, noting the excruciating caution of her movement. She was trying to hide a pattern of abuse, but the choice had been made. Lucas McCain was going to unearth the truth, and when he did, the person responsible would discover that a man who prized quiet principle was also capable of righteous fury. He was going to protect what was his. Lucas shifted his surveillance point to the wind-scarred crest near his corral, pretending to mend a broken gate as his eyes swept the trail that meandered from Dry Creek, the nearest settlement, toward Willow's shack. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the valley floor. That was when he saw the lone rider. The posture was unmistakable, Deputy Jed Stone. He rode with an entitled slouch, his silver badge flashing an arrogant signal in the dying light. Lucas harbored a deep, simmering distrust of Stone. The deputy was known for his petty cruelties and an appetite for flexing his insignificant authority. He was a bully, cloaked in a uniform. Stone reined in his horse near Willow's door, tying the reins without a moment's hesitation. This was no official call. The deputy glanced around furtively, a predator confirming his isolation, before rapping on the door with his knuckles, a loud, demanding thump. The door opened instantly, as if Willow had been waiting, resigned. From his vantage point, Lucas saw Stone shoulder his way past her threshold. Willow recoiled, her body language a silent plea for submission. The door closed and Lucas felt the cold, familiar contraction of pure, focused anger in his chest. Every nerve screamed at him to storm the shack, to end it with the savage finality of a fist fight. He stayed put. He needed more than righteous anger. He needed irrefutable proof to destroy the man's shield of office. 20 minutes later, 20 minutes that stretched into an eternity, Stone emerged. He adjusted his gun belt with the satisfied, preening manner of a man who had taken what was not freely given. Willow appeared in the frame of the doorway, subtly supporting herself with the door jamb. Even from this distance, her posture was one of acute pain. Stone swung onto his horse and rode back the way he came, whistling a jaunty, insulting tune. Willow stood motionless for a long time, then slipped back inside. The puzzle was complete. A corrupt lawman, a defenseless refugee, and a pattern of sustained battery. Lucas finally understood the limp. The next morning, the sky was a bruised, heavy purple. Lucas had not slept, instead meticulously planning the confrontation. He found Willow making a meager breakfast. She avoided his eyes, and he saw new, faint discolorations on her neck, where she hadn't managed to pull her collar high enough. The sight was a final cementing of his resolve. "Willow," Lucas said, his voice quiet but commanding. "I saw him, Deputy Stone. He's been here, hasn't he?" The coffee pot rattled violently in her hands. She placed it down, her movements stiff. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she whispered. "I saw him yesterday, and I saw how you walked when he left." Lucas kept his voice low and steady. "How long has he been doing this?" Her fragile control snapped. Her shoulders began to shake, and tears, hot and desperate, tracked paths through the desert dust on her cheeks. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "He's a deputy. Nobody will listen to me. Nobody cares about a solitary woman in this territory." She poured out the story, arriving in Dry Creek, fleeing a bad situation in the territories, and how Stone had marked her as his property almost immediately, cornering her behind the general store, threats wrapped in casual promises, making it terrifyingly clear that her life was now his domain. He said if I spoke a word, he'd plant evidence on me, or disappear me in the abandoned mines. Said nobody would search for me. She choked out. "I had to keep working. You were the only one who didn't turn me away." Lucas slowly pushed his chair back from the table. "He will not touch you again. Mr. McCain, you can't," she pleaded. "He'll have you arrested for cattle theft, or worse. The sheriff, they protect each other." Lucas was already moving toward the door. He paused and looked back at her. "Willow, I'm not a man of great learning, but I know what's right, and I know how to make a fight worth fighting." He stepped into the heavy morning air. The walk to Dry Creek would take him an hour. Time enough to decide exactly how to dismantle a deputy's reputation and his power. Dry Creek was little more than a dusty row of clapboard structures. Lucas walked down the main street with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man approaching an inevitable destination. People saw him. Lucas McCain only came to town for a reason, and that reason was always important. He found Deputy Stone exactly where he expected, lounging against the railing outside the Golden Spur Saloon, boasting loudly to a handful of men about a minor criminal he'd bullied out of the county. Stone thrived on an audience for his malice. Lucas stopped 10 feet away and waited. It took a moment for Stone to notice him, and when he did, the deputy's grin dissolved. Stone straightened, his hand instinctively dropping to the butt of his sidearm. "Well, look who the wind blew in," Stone sneered, his voice loud for the small, curious crowd that had begun to gather. "The silent homesteader, finally ready to join us, McCain? I came to speak with you about Willow Sky," Lucas said, his voice low and clear. Stone's face hardened, then twisted into a smirk. "Never heard of her, rancher. Mind your own business." "I think you have," Lucas said, stepping closer. "I think you know her intimately." The crowd grew silent, drawn by the sudden palpable tension. Lucas was glad for the witnesses. "You got something to accuse me of, Ward. You best use plain words," Stone growled, his hand now clutching the revolver handle. Lucas scanned the faces. The general store owner, the nervous barber, a few weary prospectors. They were all people who had endured Stone's tyranny because they feared his badge. "I am stating that you have been terrorizing a defenseless woman who works on my land," Lucas said, his voice rising, carrying over the street. "You are a small-minded coward who uses his star to prey on the vulnerable." The street went absolutely still. Stone's face darkened to a furious crimson. "That's a lie. You have no proof of such slander." Lucas reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small folded cloth. It was a blank piece of cotton, but to Deputy Stone it was the thread of documented evidence. "The trouble with crimes like yours, Deputy," Lucas said, slowly unfolding the cloth, "is that they leave a physical record, and records have a way of finding the right eyes." Stone pulled his gun. It was a reflex born of panic, but Lucas was faster. Years of battling dust storms and wrestling cattle gave him the speed of reflex he needed. He dove to the side as the shot spat out, the bullet gouging a furrow in the saloon's wooden awning. The crowd scattered. Lucas rolled, springing to his feet, and charged. Stone fumbled with the hammer for a second shot, but Lucas's shoulder drove into his midsection, slamming the deputy against the wall. Lucas's grip was like forged steel, twisting Stone's wrist until the deputy cried out, and the weapon clattered onto the walkway. It skidded to a stop near the boots of Marshal Tobias Dunn, who had sprinted toward the sound of the gunfire. Dunn was an older man, his face a map of responsibility, his own gun drawn but pointed toward the dirt. "Hold!" Dunn roared. "Both of you, back away!" Lucas released Stone and raised his hands, breathing heavily. The deputy slumped, clutching his sprained wrist and spitting venom. "He attacked me. An assault on an officer. Arrest him." But Marshal Dunn ignored Briggs. He looked at the faces in the scattered crowd, faces etched with fear and now a burgeoning hope. "Did this man attack the deputy without cause?" Dunn asked the townspeople. The silence returned, profound and uncomfortable. Then a voice broke it, the elderly wife of the local blacksmith. "Marshal," she said, trembling but resolved, "you need to listen to what your deputy has been doing here." "Don't listen to the old fool," Stone shouted, his voice desperate. But the floodgates were open. The general store owner described how Stone had stolen minor supplies. A prospector told of how Stone had demanded tribute for passage through the canyon. One after another, the stories tumbled out, detailing a pattern of abuse of power against those who could not fight back. Marshal Dunn's face grew rigid. He looked at Stone with cold disgust. "Vernon," he said, his voice quiet. "Final. Tell me about this Willow Sky." "I don't know any." "Stop, Dunn." Cut him off, his voice like iron. "No more lies." Lucas stepped forward. "Marshal, the woman is on my land. She bears bruises, the evidence of a bully with a badge." Dunn studied Lucas. He knew McCain. The homesteader was an immovable man. "These are capital charges, McCain," Dunn stated. "They're lies, Marshal. It's a conspiracy," Stone yelled. Lucas then produced the actual evidence he had retrieved that morning. A small torn piece of brown wool, which he'd found caught on the latch of Willow's door. It was the exact shade and texture of Stone's uniform jacket. Dunn looked from the fabric to the deputy's coat, then back to Lucas. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the solemnity of justice finally served. "Deputy Jed Stone, you are under arrest." The heavy steel door of the single jail cell clanged shut on Deputy Stone. Marshal Dunn turned the key with deliberate ceremony, then hung it on the board behind his desk. "I will need Miss Sky to come to town tomorrow," Dunn told Lucas. "She needs to file a formal deposition." "She will be here," Lucas affirmed. "And McCain," Dunn said, his weathered face serious. "Thank you. I should have seen this." "We all should have," Lucas replied, "but it is done now." The solitary ride back to his homestead was a time of reflection. Willow would need time. Time to heal the scars that went deeper than the bruises. He found her sitting on the steps of her cabin, staring at the purple majesty of the peaks. "It is finished," Lucas announced as he dismounted. "Stone is in the marshal's cell. He will not trouble you again." Willow's legs gave out, and she sank onto the rough timber of the steps. For a moment she was utterly still, then the tears began. Not the silent, defensive tears he'd seen before, but a heavy, liberating torrent that washed away months of terror. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "I thought he would always—" "You thought wrong," Lucas said gently. "Sometimes, all it takes is one witness to speak the truth." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared, painting the sky with violent streaks of orange and blood red. The homestead felt lighter, the oppressive shadow finally lifted. "What now, Mr. McCain?" Willow finally asked. "Now," Lucas replied, looking out over the desert he had made his own. "You heal. You remember what it means to be safe, and if you still want the work, my offer stands." He looked at her. "If people ask what happened, let them ask. The truth is a fire. It spreads faster than any lie can run." As the first sharp desert stars appeared, Willow Sky offered a small tentative smile. It was fragile, a new bloom in a harsh land, but it was genuine. For Lucas McCain, who valued action over words, that moment of genuine relief was the only reward he needed. Sometimes the most important stand was taken not with a gun, but with the quiet courage of a man who decided that his principles were worth the fight. Lucas McCain had spoken, and his simple voice had moved the heavy foundation of injustice. The truth had set the desert flower free.